I've held off discussing the endings of these two shows for quite a while now, and although it was partly a method of artificially inflating anticipation for each new part, it was also because the endings of these shows are particularly interesting. Friends' ending is interesting, at least for me, because it plays out exactly as you would expect it to based on the rest of the show. I mean, like, exactly as you would expect. Chandler and Monica become parents and move into their house in the suburbs together. Phoebe lives happily ever after with Mike. Joey has a new bird, and Ross and Rachel get together once again. Now, I don't want to go in depth about each character's conclusion because, like I said, they are basically just the logical and thematic continuations of their characters up until this point, and I've already talked about each of their arcs individually. I will say that it's heartwarming to see Chandler and Monica finally start a family after all their struggles to do so. It's wonderful to see Phoebe end up with Mike, and, well, Joey kinda got shafted. I do want to give special attention to Ross and Rachel, however, because the last few episodes not only accentuate the biggest problem in their arc, but serves as a fascinating turning point in Western television as a whole. So basically, Rachel gets offered an amazing job in Paris and is intent on pursuing it. Meanwhile, Ross continually and secretly visits her old boss and attempts to get him to offer Rachel more money to keep her current job. Despite the fact that her job in Paris is a huge opportunity for her and would give her the luxury of moving to Paris, something which she's obviously excited about, Ross does everything in his power to prevent her from accomplishing that dream that she set out to achieve in the beginning of the series. All of this simply because he's in love with her and he can't bear the idea of not having her in his life. I've gone over it before, so I'll just say that this is clearly possessive and controlling behavior by Ross, and it makes it incredibly hard to root for him. Despite this, I'm sure that there are many people who are saying that this criticism isn't valid because upon Rachel deciding to stay in New York for the money that Ross convinced her boss to offer her, Ross, seeing how excited Rachel was about going to Paris, tells her to go instead of taking the higher paying job in New York because it's what she wants. Sounds just like what I praised Ted for in the first part of this video series, right? Well, yes, however, the key difference in Ross's case for why this moment does not forgive his actions is because this is the home stretch of the show and Ross has not progressed at all since the moment he first saw Rachel. He's actually gotten a lot worse. But more importantly, Ross has failed to learn this exact lesson in the past multiple times, and as a result, the conceit that Ross has grown as a person here rings completely hollow, and what do you know, Ross backpedals after Rachel's going away party just 2 episodes later. All of a sudden, he once again can't stand not being with her, so he rushes after her to the airport to confess his love. Even after 10 seasons of will they won't they waffling, Friends insists on beating this dead horse of a subplot further and further into the ground as it nears its conclusion. And the real cherry on top of all of this is that Ross is rewarded for his actions. Rachel suddenly realizes that she loves Ross too and rushes back to his apartment where they at long last consummate their love and get together once again. I've said it before and I'll say it again, Friends teaches its audience that love is the end-all be-all when that is not only an incorrect message but a straight-up harmful one. Allow me to elaborate. Ross only gets together with Rachel because he confronts her with how much he loves her and she reciprocates, and all of this happens despite the fact that they have broken up multiple times in the past for very good reason. Imagine, if you will, an actual real-life man who is in love with his ex-girlfriend who is about to move far away from the town or city they both live in. The man confesses his love to the woman and she insists that she has to leave because that's what would be best for her. Now imagine that the girl didn't magically change her mind despite logic pointing in the other direction and rush back into the man's arms. The man, if he had taken the theme of Friends to heart, would likely feel extremely cheated and could very easily incubate an extremely negative mentality towards the girl even though she did nothing wrong. I know this is an extreme example, but I use it to illustrate a point. That point simply being that Friends has, in my humble opinion, a bad theme, which I believe is the result of its insistence on pushing the power of love message and forcing 2 characters together at the end of the show. Now, you may remember that I mentioned that Friends marks an interesting turning point in Western television, and I believe that this is exactly it. Friends was massively popular. The airing of its finale had over 50 million US viewers, so it's no surprise that it was a little influential. Quite a few sitcoms, movies, and even cartoons following Friends pulled the last-second relationship trick, and it usually ends up not being that great due to a lot of the same criticisms I've had of Ross and Rachel's ending. Even my favorite media piece of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender, does this trope, and although Aang and Katara most certainly do not make a bad couple, they still do feel like the obvious ship for the series. It can become annoying seeing their relationship get constantly hinted at while the audience just waits until the last episode for the show to tell them what they already know is going to happen. And I bring up the influence Friends had not only because it's interesting, but because I think it's exactly why the original ending to How I Met Your Mother is so hated. Up until this point, everything I've said about How I Met Your Mother has been under the pretense that I'm talking about the show's alternative ending, and I'm sure there's at least a few people who are confused by this. Basically, after the huge amount of backlash the creators received when How I Met Your Mother aired its original ending, they recut an alternative ending for the Season 9 DVD, which most audience members agree greatly improved upon the initial finale. But why was the original ending so hated? Why have I made it a point not to discuss it up until now? And why is it significantly worse than the ending of Friends?
This needs to stop now. This is cancer. This is so much cancer that I can feel the tumors growing on my back. Can you help a nigga out and just stop this? Please?
The final season of How I Met Your Mother takes place on Barney and Robin's wedding weekend for the first 22 episodes, and for the last 2 are spent flashing forward in time to the gang's biggest moments in the 15 years between Barney and Robin's wedding and the present day when Ted is telling his kids this story. The first 22 episodes feature many glimpses into Ted and Tracy, the mothers, life together, and in the final 2 episodes we see them grow into the couple they had been built up to for the past 9 seasons. And everything is capped off with one last speech by Ted about love. One last speech about how lucky he is to have met Tracy McConnell. One last speech about how much he loved her. Loved. Past tense. In one line of dialogue, future Ted, our narrator, undoes the entirety of his arc as we learn that the mother contracted a serious illness 6 years before when he is telling his kids this story. And she dies. The mother, the character that the fans had been awaiting for 9 seasons, the character that had been the light at the end of Ted's increasingly dark tunnel of life as the show goes on. We see Ted and Tracy at their wedding. Happy, nostalgic music is playing in the background. Ted is describing how much he loves Tracy and how much he knew he had to spend every moment of his life loving her as much as he possibly could. And then it all comes crumbling to the ground with just 4 words.
And I carried it with me when she got sick.
This is seriously depressing shit. How I Met Your Mother has never been afraid to throw tragedy at its characters, but that tragedy was always followed up by how the characters got through it. And while there are 5 minutes left in the episode after we learn of Tracy's passing, the finale does not choose to show us how Ted deals with the passing of his wife like many of the other tragic moments in the show. It does something worse. Much worse. Ted, in these last 2 minutes of the show's runtime, gets back together with Robin. Oh yeah, Barney and Robin got divorced. I'll talk about that later. This moment to me can only be described as pure disaster. A betrayal, dare I say it, a slap in the face. There is a wonderful video made by the channel Entertain the Elk that I think does a great job at encapsulating why this ending was so hated, so I'd recommend watching that video. The long and short of it, though, is that throughout the show, the audience is repeatedly shown why Ted and Robin are not right for each other, but Craig Thomas and Carter Bays, the creators of How I Met Your Mother, initially wanted Robin and Ted to end up together. And in order to not have Ted's kids look much older when the finale was aired, they recorded it in advance during the production of Season 2, assuming that Robin and Ted would be romantic endgame by the end of the show. This is why Ted inexplicably has a change of heart in the last 2 minutes of the show. It's why Barney and Robin get divorced. It's why Tracy, the character that was supposed to be Ted's long-awaited happily ever after, gets killed off in the name of following the trend which was set by Friends. I know how negative this is all gonna sound, but in a way, Friends is the biggest problem in How I Met Your Mother. The absolutely astonishing influence Friends had on the Western television industry as a whole crept its way into the production of How I Met Your Mother and locked it into an ending that would go against the entirety of the story. Obviously, I'm not saying that Friends is the reason that How I Met Your Mother has a bad ending, though. It was Craig and Thomas who chose to follow the last-minute relationship trope, so the blame ultimately falls on them. I just can't help but feel like if Friends didn't end in the way it did, How I Met Your Mother wouldn't have had such an atrocious ending. I mean, the fact that they felt the need to make an alternate ending at all tells you just how poorly it was received. But what about that alternate ending? Instead of Ted narrating about how much he loved Tracy, in the alternate ending, future Ted reminisces about the long road that led him towards meeting Tracy and all the biggest events that took place on that road. Most importantly though, Tracy does not die. This one simple change takes the depressing original ending and turns it into the one we were always supposed to get, and the one which I have been discussing and will continue to discuss throughout this video series. Ted was always supposed to end up with Tracy. His entire arc was about him enduring everything life sent his way so that he could finally meet the mother of his children. There are so many individual moments where Ted demonstrates his emotional resilience, and each one serves to build up the reveal of the mother by emphasizing all the shit Ted had to go through to get where he is now. And by season 9, Ted is nothing short of worn down. He has taken so much for so long, and now, even though he wants Robin to be happy with Barney, he can't help but feel hurt that Robin won't end up with him. As a result, Ted decides to leave New York and move to Chicago to get a fresh start on life, and I cannot emphasize how amazing this decision was for the writers. This is because, based on the previous 8 seasons, having Ted leave the group for this reason feels completely organic, strengthens his characterization as wanting the best for Robin no matter how much it hurts him, and generates the most dramatic weight possible, which is exactly what you want for a series finale. And amazingly, the show is able to basically brush off this plot point, having Ted decide to stay in New York and not have it feel like it was a waste of time, because all the building blocks leading to this turn in the plot were set up during season 9. Ted makes peace with Barney, realizes through Lily that he truly loves living in New York, and finally lets go of Robin. Meeting Tracy is just the catalyst for his decision to stay because every other reason he had for leaving has now been resolved. To put it simply, How I Met Your Mother sets up Ted's happily ever after nearly flawlessly, and with the alternate ending actually follows through on that promise. It really is just solid storytelling on a structural basis. And it leads to a heartwarming emotional payoff on par with some of my favorite films and TV shows of all time, due in no small part to the phenomenal casting and acting. It brings me that classic feeling of happily ever after that I thought I had left behind as a kid, securing this show that I had already loved to death as one of my favorite pieces of media ever. And still, Barney and Robin get divorced. Even in this alternative ending that I have been praising for being heartwarming, Barney and Robin don't get their happily ever after together. And this is likely the biggest remaining criticism most fans have of How I Met Your Mother, as Barney and Robin remain separated even in the alternative ending. Season 9 took place almost exclusively during Barney and Robin's wedding weekend and had multiple episodes wherein they were presented with the possibility that their relationship might not last. The poker game, the rehearsal dinner, and end of the aisle are all great examples of this. In each, Barney and Robin worry for one reason or another that they don't make a very good couple, but by the end of the episode they have resolved that worry and oftentimes taught the audience a lesson in the process.
I've decided to make only one vow to you, because it's the only one that really counts. From this day forward, I am always going to be honest with you, because I love you.
And it is because the show spent so much time reassuring the audience that they would stand the test of time by showing how the two of them got past each of these smaller conflicts that it is especially unfortunate that they ended up separated. However, I would like to acknowledge what Barney and Robin's conclusion contributes to How I Met Your Mother thematically, that being the prevailing sense of realism. Yes, it sucks that Barney and Robin couldn't make it work, but sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And it's not like their divorce comes out of nowhere or doesn't make sense. They actually split up for the same reason nearly every single one of Robin's past relationships failed, that being her career. With Barney evolving into someone who values a lifelong partner and Robin getting promoted to worldwide news anchor, they become increasingly unhappy with their relationship because Robin spends so much time traveling and it's too much of a hassle to have Barney come with. Barney, keeping the vow he made to Robin at their wedding, tells her that he feels like he would be happier if they were not together, and Robin reciprocates. It's just as Ted narrates in the alternate ending.
It was life. Stuff happens in life. Things fall apart. Things get put back together.
And that is what How I Met Your Mother is a story about. Life. The highs, the lows, and everything in between. It is what makes this a show that connected with so many people. It is what makes it so distinct from its predecessors, and it is what makes these characters feel like real people. And I absolutely acknowledge that this same mindset can be applied to the original ending. Death will be just as common in most people's lives as divorce, more so in fact. And I also absolutely understand liking the original ending because it could be seen as arguably more realistic. But I think that the alternative ending does this well while also managing to leave the audience on a happy note. It fits itself between realism and idealism, and in my experience of observing the conversation surrounding the original and alternative endings of How I Met Your Mother, whether you think that either of these endings is too negative or too unrealistic, or that one of them strikes a perfect balance between the two, will depend on the individual. Personally, I think that although it makes sense why Barney and Robin broke up, it would have made for a much better ending if they had stayed together, because the show already has plenty of realism in it without the divorce, and it wouldn't strain my suspension of disbelief for Robin's career to not be a problem in their relationship. Furthermore, keeping them together would prevent Barney's biggest character arc from taking a massive blow. After the divorce, Barney falls right back into his old womanizing ways. He hits on girls half his age, he creates a new playbook, he attempts and completes a perfect month, sleeping with 30 different women in 30 days. The only bit of progression he receives in the finale is in becoming a father. The 30th girl he slept with during his perfect month gets pregnant and has a child. That's about the extent of it. This feels extremely thrown in at the last minute, but despite this, it does finally, once and for all, end Barney's womanizing ways. It's sad that his relationship with Barney ultimately wasn't the motivation for this change in his character, and it is incredibly rushed, but at the very least, it's better to have Barney move forward with his life instead of completely regressing back into his former self. The alternate ending to How I Met Your Mother is by no means perfect, but I can confidently say that even with its flaws, it manages to outdo the finale of Friends overall. Where I felt that Friends' only real positive, emotionally powerful conclusion came in the form of Monica and Chandler's arc, I feel much more strongly about Ted and Tracy and Marshall and Lily's endings. The only ending I felt negative about was Barney's, and I was pretty indifferent towards Robin's. And unfortunately, I can't say that I liked most of Friends' character conclusions. I already went over my thoughts on Ross and Rachel. I'm indifferent towards Phoebe, and I felt like Joey really got the short end of the stick. His friends are moving away, his relationship with Rachel didn't work out, and his career as an actor never really took off, and it's probably going to be really hard to get that to happen after his agent Estelle died. I find it very strange that both of these shows somehow managed to accidentally fall into such melancholy finales despite their nature as sitcoms, you know, situational comedies. I mean, as much as I've praised How I Met Your Mother for being able to bring such strong emotions out of me, I would not have gotten past the first episode if the jokes sucked. Same thing applies to Friends. At each step of these shows' journeys, they had to keep the audience laughing, and they largely succeeded in that, meaning that the creators had their eye on what the backbone of their show was. These shows are supposed to make you happy. They're supposed to endear you into the characters and give those characters conflicts to deal with, followed by having the characters get through them as better people. But unfortunately, I can't say that either of these shows' endings fully lives up to that standard. This concludes part 2 of why How I Met Your Mother is better than Friends. Oof, this video was pretty negative, huh? Well, don't worry, the rest of this series will not be so focused on the negative aspects of either of these shows. In fact, in the future, I'm not even going to be talking that much about either of these shows, as I plan to branch this video series out into more of an analysis of the conversation surrounding How I Met Your Mother and Friends, rather than the shows themselves. My goal in doing this is to take the comparison of these two shows beyond just How I Met Your Mother is better than Friends, even though that is the title of this series. I want to demonstrate why so many people have so many different opinions about these shows so that you all can come to an understanding not only with other people, but with yourselves. If I can get even one person to develop a better grasp of why they feel the way they do about either of these shows and apply that knowledge to other shows so that they can find more media they like, I will have accomplished far more than just confirming the beliefs of people who share my opinion and potentially pissing off people who don't. If you're new here and you're someone who values these things as well, I implore you to check out my other videos as they largely consist of these kinds of video essays. With that said though, you know the drill, like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel, and hit the bell icon to get notified of when I upload future parts in this series. Thank you so much for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Continued in part 3.